The Human Condition by Hannah Arendt. This is page 181 to page 188. The Web of Relationships and the Enacted Stories. The manifestation of who the speaker and doer unexchangeably is, though it is plainly visible, retains a curious intangibility that confounds all efforts towards unequivocal verbal expression. The moment we want to say who somebody is, our very vocabulary leads us astray into saying what he is. We get entangled in a description of qualities he necessarily shares with others like him. We begin to describe a type or a character in the old meaning of the word, with the result that his specific uniqueness escapes us. This frustration has the closest affinity with the well-known philosophic impossibility to arrive at a definition of man, all definitions being determinations or interpretations of what man is, of qualities, therefore, which he could possibly share with other living beings, whereas his specific difference would be found in a determination of a kind of who he is. Yet apart from this philosophic perplexity, the impossibility, as it were, to solidify in words the living essence of the person as it shows itself in the flux of action and speech, has great bearing upon the whole realm of human affairs, where we exist primarily as acting and speaking beings. It excludes in principle our ever being able to handle these affairs as we handle things whose nature is at our disposal because we can name them. The point is that the manifestation of the who comes to pass in the same manner as the notoriously unreliable manifestations of ancient oracles, who, according to Heraclitus, neither reveal nor hide in words, but give manifest signs. This is a basic factor in the equally notorious uncertainty not only of all political matters, but of all affairs that go on between men directly, without the intermediary, stabilizing, and solidifying influence of things. This is only the first of many frustrations by which action, and consequently the togetherness and intercourse of men, are ridden. It is perhaps the most fundamental of those we shall deal with, insofar as it does not rise out of the comparisons with more reliable and productive activities, such as the fabrication or contemplation or cognition or even labor, but indicates something that frustrates action in terms of its own purposes. What is at stake is the revelatory character without which action and speech would lose all human relevance. Action and speech go on between men as they are directed toward them, and they retain their agent-revealing capacity even if their content is exclusively objective, concerned with the matters of the world of things in which men move, which physically lies between them and out of which arise their specific objective worldly interests. These interests constitute, in the word's most literal significance, something which inter est, which lies between people, and therefore can relate and bind them together. Most action and speech is concerned with this in-betweenness, which varies with each group of people, so that most words and deeds are about some worldly objective reality, in addition to being a disclosure of the acting and speaking agent. Since this disclosure of the subject is an integral part of all, even the most objective intercourse, the physical, worldly in-between, along with its interests, is overlaid and, as it were, overgrown with an altogether different in-between which consists of deeds and words and owes its origin exclusively to men's acting and speaking directly to one another. This second subjective in-between is not tangible, since there are no tangible objects into which it could solidify. The process of acting and speaking can leave behind no such results and no end products. But for all its intangibility, this in-between is no less real than the world of things we visibly have in common. We call this reality the web of human relationships, indicating by the metaphor its somewhat intangible quality. To be sure, this web is no less bound to the objective world of things than speech is to the existence of a living body, but the relationship is not like that of a facade, or, in Marxian terminology, of an essentially superfluous superstructure affixed to the useful structure of the building itself. The basic error of all materialism in politics, and this materialism is not Marxist, and not even modern in origin, but as old as our history of political theory, is to overlook the inevitability with which men disclose themselves as subjects, as distinct and unique persons, even when they wholly concentrate upon reaching an altogether worldly, material object. To dispense with this disclosure, if indeed it could ever be done, would mean to transform men into something they are not. To deny, on the other hand, that this disclosure is real and has consequences of its own is simply unrealistic. The realm of human affairs, strictly speaking, consists of the web of human relationships which exists wherever men live together. The disclosure of the who through speech and the setting of a new beginning through action always fall into an already existing web where their immediate consequences can be felt. Together they start a new process which eventually emerges as the unique life story of the newcomer, affecting uniquely the life stories of all those with whom he comes into contact. It is because of this already existing web of human relationships, with its innumerable conflicting wills and intentions, that action almost never adheres to its purpose. But it is also because of this medium, in which action alone is real, that it produces stories, with or without intention, as naturally as fabrication produces tangible things. These stories may then be recorded in documents and monuments. They may be visible in use objects or artworks. They may be told and retold and worked into all kinds of material. They themselves, in their living reality, are of an altogether different nature than these reifications. They tell us more about their subjects, the hero in the center of each story, than any product of human hands ever tells us about the master who produced it, and yet they are not products, properly speaking. Although everybody started his life by inserting himself into the human world through action and speech, nobody is the author or producer of his own life story. In other words, the stories, the results of action and speech, reveal an agent, but this agent is not an author or producer. Somebody began it and its subject in the twofold sense of the word, namely, its actor and sufferer, but nobody is its author. That every individual life between birth and death can eventually be told as a story with a beginning and end is the pre-political and prehistorical condition of history, the great story without a beginning and end. But the reason why each human life tells its story, and why history ultimately becomes the storybook of mankind, with many actors and speakers and yet without any tangible authors, is that both are the outcome of the action, for the great unknown in history that has baffled the philosophy of history in the modern age arises not only when one considers history as a whole and finds that its subject, mankind, is an abstraction which can never be an active agent. The same unknown has baffled political philosophy from its beginning in antiquity, and contributed to the general contempt in which philosophers since Plato have held the realm of human affairs. The perplexity is that in any series of events that together form a story with a unique meaning, we can at best isolate the agent who set the whole process into motion, and although this agent frequently remains the subject, the hero of the story, we can never point unequivocally to him as the author of its eventual outcome. It is for this reason that Plato thought that human affairs, ta ton anthropon pragmata, the outcome of action, praxis, should not be treated with great seriousness. The actions of men appear like the gestures of puppets led by an invisible hand behind the scene, so that man seems to be a kind of plaything of a god. It is noteworthy that Plato, who had no inkling of the modern concept of history, should have been the first to invent the metaphor of an actor behind the scenes who, behind the backs of acting men, pulls the strings and is responsible for the story. The Platonic god is but a symbol for the fact that real stories, in distinction from those we invent, have no author. As such, he is the true forerunner of Providence, the invisible hand, nature, the world spirit, class interest, and the like, with which Christian and modern philosophers of history tried to solve the perplexing problem that although history owes its existence to men, it is still obviously not made by them. Nothing, in fact, indicates more clearly the political nature of history, its being a story of action and deeds rather than of trends and forces or ideas, than the introduction of an invisible actor behind the scenes whom we find in all philosophies of history, which for this reason alone can be recognized as political philosophies in disguise. By the same token, the simple fact that Adam Smith needed an invisible hand to guide economic dealings on the exchange market shows plainly that more than sheer economic activity is involved in exchange, and that economic man, when he makes his appearance on the market, is an acting being, and neither exclusively a producer nor a trader and barterer. The invisible actor behind the scenes is an invention rising from a mental perplexity, but corresponding to no real experience. though it, the story resulting from action, is misconstrued as a fictional story, where indeed an author pulls the strings and directs the play. The fictional story reveals a maker just as every work of art clearly indicates that it was made by somebody. This does not belong to the character of the story itself, but only to the mode in which it came into existence. The distinction between a real and a fictional story is precisely that the latter was made up, and the former not made at all. The real story in which we are engaged as long as we live has no visible or invisible maker because it is not made. The only somebody it reveals is its hero, and it is the only medium in which the originally intangible manifestation of a uniquely distinct who can be tangible ex post facto through action and speech. Who somebody is, or was, we can know only by knowing the story of which he is himself the hero, his biography, in other words. Everything else we know of him, including the work he may have produced and left behind, tells us only what he is or was. Thus, although we know much less of Socrates, who did not write a single line and left no work behind, than of Plato or Aristotle, we know much better and more intimately who he was, because we know his story. Then we know who Aristotle was, about whose opinions we are so much better informed. The hero the story discloses needs no heroic qualities. The word hero, originally, that is, in Homer, was no more than a name given each free man who participated in the Trojan enterprise, and about whom a story could be told. The connotation of courage, which we now feel to be an indispensable quality of the hero, is in fact already present in a willingness to act and speak at all, to insert oneself into the world and begin a story of one's own. And this courage is not necessarily or even primarily related to a willingness to suffer the consequences. Courage, and even boldness, are already present in leaving one's private hiding place, and showing who one is, in disclosing and exposing oneself. The extent of this original courage, without which action and speech, and therefore, according to the Greeks, freedom, would not be possible at all, it is not less great, and may even be greater if the hero happens to be a coward. The specific content, as well as the general meaning of action and speech, may take various forms of reification in artworks, which glorify a deed or accomplishment, and by transformation and condensation show some extraordinary event in its full significance. However, the specific revelatory quality of action and speech, the implicit manifestation of the agent and speaker, is so indissolubly tied to the living flux of acting and speaking that it can be represented and reified only through a kind of repetition, the imitation or mimesis, which according to Aristotle prevails in all arts, but is actually appropriate only to the drama, whose very name, from the Greek verb dran, to act, indicates that play acting actually is an imitation of acting. But the imitative element lies not only in the art of the actor, but, as Aristotle rightly claims, in the making or writing of the play, at least to the extent that the drama fully comes to life only when it is enacted in the theatre. Only the actors and speakers who reenact the story's plot can convey the full meaning, not so much of the story itself, but of the heroes who reveal themselves in it. In terms of Greek tragedy, this would mean that the story's direct, as well as its universal meaning, is revealed by the chorus, which does not imitate, and whose comments are pure poetry, whereas the intangible identities of the agents in the story, since they escape all generalization, and therefore all reification, can be conveyed only through an imitation of their acting. This is also why the theatre is the political art par excellence. Only there is the political sphere of human life transposed into art. By the same token, it is the only art whose sole subject is man, and his relationship to others.